Hi, everybody, and this is Paleolithic People the Way We Were. This is the second presentation, and it's dealing with the Strayer reading, The Way We Were. And it just gives you an overview of Paleolithic society, and we're going to be comparing it to agricultural society once we learn about the Neolithic Revolution. So first thing that you need to know about this is that this is the majority of human history. Since human evolution, most human experience has been an experience of hunter-gathering. And the problem is that we don't know much about this. We don't have a lot of records of what life was like during the period where humans hunted and gathered. And so a lot of what we know about this, we have to piece together from evidence that we have. And this makes it really, really difficult. But this is a very big period of time in human development. And it really is important that we look at it because we cannot ignore about 200,000 years of human history. So the first thing you need to know here is that humans in the Paleolithic age had forms of social organization. It was not anarchy. Every human was not out for themselves. People organized themselves into societies, and some of those societies actually survived into the present day. So the majority of what we know about Paleolithic society actually come from peoples that are still around and that have maintained this type of life. So one thing that I just want to make sure is clear to everyone is that when we talk about Paleolithic man and women, and we're talking about cavemen, here's another phrase here, we are talking about humans, and we're talking about Homo sapiens who are fully developed. They have the same capabilities that modern humans have. They just have a very different type of society. There's, first of all, not that many of them, and you see here that population grows once we hit the Neolithic Revolution. And once we start farming, then we do have a boom in population. But the world really couldn't sustain that many hunter-gatherers. The other thing that is important to know is that they are nomadic. They're mostly seasonally nomadic. They follow the herds, but that does not mean that they did not stay in particular locations for extended periods of time. And sometimes the movement of peoples, like for example, when we talked about people in the Americas or Australia, it takes place over thousands of years. No band moved 1,000 miles from one location to another. They are mostly moving locally. And there are some evidence that they had some sort of semi-permanent dwellings. And so we do know that they weren't completely nomadic. They were semi-nomadic in some cases. Mostly live in clans of 40 to 60 related individuals. A clan is like a big extended families, and we do know that sometimes clans work together in order to form tribes, and they cooperated in group hunting. So, for example, sometimes you needed a huge amount of planning and preparation in order to conduct the hunt, and families would work together to drive a herd off a cliff, for example, or to set fire to a given area in order to drive the animals in a given direction. So this did happen. They spent about 3 hours of their day hunting and gathering, depending on where you were. If there was a lot of game and a lot of fish, then life was pretty easy and life was pretty good. Clans traded with each other. They did connect and came together, sometimes for ritual purposes. But, it was a pretty good and easy life the majority of the time. The big problem here is that food availability is unpredictable. And that is something that we're going to discuss in class in terms of the decision to settle down. But for the most part, this was a pretty good life. Because they were moving around a lot, they couldn't really accumulate a lot of stuff. They didn't have labor specialization, and so therefore we believe that these societies were mostly egalitarian, and that includes men and women. So where later societies became patriarchal, we do believe that women had a higher status in Paleolithic life. That does not mean that they did not have government, and government is perhaps not the right word, but they did have rules, and they had social consequences for rule breaking, and it was not anarchy. they were organized. And for example, if a person were to break a taboo or something like that, they could be exiled, which is probably one of the worst things that could happen to you in Paleolithic life. In terms of technology, we do know that they use fire, and they use fire to alter their environment. One of the big things about humans is that really no matter where we go, we alter our environment. And there are waves of extinctions that essentially follow human migrations. Um, Other than fire, humans are known for making tools, and some really important ones that you should know are the hunting spears, the atol atol, which are really cool. I suggest you guys try making them because you can throw a spear pretty far using this type of device. The bone needle allowed people to go into cold areas. You could get different layers of clothing. You could sew. They have basket weaving, nets, pottery, which they could use for fishing. And so they do have some technology. In addition to that, we do believe that they had a very rich cultural life. So it's really hard to parse out exactly what they believed. And they do think that there was diversity in what different communities believed. And this is based off of the hunter-gatherer societies that have survived into today. But for the most part, and this is really important that you guys note this, for the most part, they believe that they were animists. And animism is one of the religions that you should know. We're going to be adding this to our religions chart. But basically, they believe that the world is inhabited by spirits, and nature embodies either ancestors or omens or good or bad spirits. So, for example, you pick up a rock, that rock may be an ancestor. And then they believed that they could access the spirit world through shamans. And shamans were likely to use different types of techniques to either contact the spirit world or predict the future. So we do have a lot of attempts to predict the future in early societies. And so their ceremonial life is pretty rich. And we do believe that in some cases they used hallucinogenic drugs in order to access the spirit world, which it's kind of interesting because some of these societies today that have survived have used different forms. You see this in Australia and some Native Americans in the US as well. Okay, so here are some examples of art. And these are cave paintings. These are some of the really famous ones. Lascaux cave painting being one of the famous ones. And what this should show you is that they had a very rich cultural life as well. They did have art, but they also had music, which is interesting because it's something that we can't exactly recreate. We don't know what their music was like, but they had flutes, and they also had sculptures. Most of this was potentially used for ceremonial purposes. So the cave paintings are probably one of the most interesting things that we can look at. We don't know exactly what they mean, but we think that they mean something. These are not just decorative art, and some theories basically argue that they are done by shamans in order to access the spirit world in some way or to pass down beliefs to children. We don't know exactly what they were for, but there's not a lot of people in them. Most of these cave paintings are just of animals, and sometimes of humans who have animal heads, for example. There's also abstract symbols and handprints. And there's actually a really interesting TED Talk that I'm going to be referring to in class about different forms of symbols found in caves all over the world, and they have been cataloging them. And what they're basically trying to figure out is if there was a form of writing that was used by the early Paleolithic people. And they haven't quite determined that yet, but it's just really, really interesting. The final thing I want to mention here is the role of women. And like I said, they were egalitarian. They believed that women had a higher status. But we have these female figurines, sculptures, that may have had some sort of ritual or religious symbolism, and perhaps they were goddesses. And if this were true, it would definitely give women a higher status in the society.